In this tutorial, I will be demonstrating how to create a pad with Logic's ESP Poly Synthesizer. First off, the most important thing to note is that the ESP Poly Synthesizer uses subtractive synthesis in order to create sound. Subtractive synthesis essentially is the process of removing or subtracting overtones from a waveform in order to create a desirable sound. And of course, that sound could be, music per se, or simply a soundscape. No limit on that for sure. The source of sound in the synthesizer would be the oscillator. And for that, the waveforms that are the most helpful for subtractive synthesis specifically would be either the triangle waveform, the square waveform, or the pulse. The key factor and the reason why those waveforms are helpful is that for subtractive synthesis, we really want to begin with a timbre that is really complex. And by that, I mean a timbre that has many overtones. If you're going to be subtracting from something, it's helpful to have something that's still left over once you're done. And so for that reason, please note that sine waves are not helpful or desirable for subtractive synthesis because there are no overtones, just to make sure that I'm on the same page about that. And then finally is just kind of a clarification, again, that the reason that you want to have a waveform that has so many overtones is that it just simply gives you more creative options because you can use different ranges of the frequency spectrum to carve out with, filters and whatnot. And then that essentially what's left over is your sound. So the more range of frequencies and more overtones that you have, then different types of sounds that you can create and also create over different periods of time. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so here we are in Logic, and I've opened up the ESP Poly Synth, and I just kind of want to give you a brief overview of the actual synthesizer before we begin creating the pad, so we kind of know what our tools are. Over here we have the 4, 8, and 16 knobs on the left, and these just represent octaves. So if I leave it at 4, whatever pitch I play on my keyboard, that's the pitch that I'm going to hear. If I'm doing 8, I'm going to hear an octave below, and if I press the 16 knob, I'm going to hear the octave below that. Over here, we have our sliders, which are controlling our oscillators. So these, are our sources of sound. And being a polysynthesizer, there's several. And we're probably going to use them simultaneously because that will create a nice, beautiful, thick pad, which is what I would like to do, at least in this video. So over here on the left, slider 1, you're going to have a triangle oscillator. Slider 2 is your sawtooth. Slider 3 is your rectangle. And then what's really nice about slider 4 and 5 is that you actually have the rectangle sub-oscillator -1. So that's an octave below this rectangular. And then on slider 5, you have 2 octaves below. And this is great for pads because you can really bring these in, which will thicken your sound, and it creates something that I think is really, really beautiful. Then over here for noise, this might be a little bit more for perhaps if we were doing a wind or waves or helicopters kind of thing, because this is just white noise. So however much of that you want in there, that's what you're getting. So on these knobs, we have the vibreur knob and the speed. So if I'm pointing it more toward the vib, that's actually the vibrato. And then whenever I'm going over on the wah, this is actually modulating the filter. So depending on which side I'm going to go to, modulating the pitch versus the filter, the speed of that change is determined right here. And then in the center, I have, of course, the big one, the frequency knob, which is pretty important. It's setting the cutoff frequency of the low-pass filter. So how many and at what level do I want my low frequencies going through? And do I want to accent that with the resonance? Because the resonance is essentially going to be boosting or cutting portions of the frequency that I defined up here. So how I interconnect with these two is pretty important. The 1, 3, 2, 3, 3, 3 knobs, or buttons rather, they're a little bit more if I was trying to create something that was like an acoustic instrument, where like a high pitch on an acoustic guitar would sound brighter than the lower pitch. And so by pressing 1, 2, or 3, I can actually add brightness to the higher frequencies. If I don't, then I'm going to have brightness on all my frequencies, which actually I kind of like that for my pad, so I'm going to leave them. But if I was trying to create something more acoustic, that's a nice option to have. And then over here for the ADSR, obviously our envelope, attack, decay, sustain, release. And then we just have here the velo filter, or velocity, determines to what extent I want velocity to control my cutoff frequency with my knob. So from 0 to 127. So I'm going to have that all the way up. And then the ADSR int knob controls the depth of the cutoff frequency modulation applied by the envelope modulator. So, or envelope generator. I think that for this, I think of it as creating almost like a sense of 3D space. So I definitely usually like to have the depth of this quite a bit higher, because that's impacting how much of my sound is going through that envelope. And I want my envelope to be affecting my sound a lot. The volume, just the master volume. And then the velocity volume knob sends the velocity sensitivity to my MIDI note events. So for this, we can kind of experiment, but probably halfway. And then chorus effects and how much overdrive effect. So if I want to thicken my sound with chorus or distort it slightly, I have effects right here in my synth. So let's get started creating a pad. Great. So now let's begin actually creating the pad. Before we do anything, I'm just going to play a C chord so we can hear, or specifically you can hear, what the ESP polysynth is going to sound like when you open it up. So here we go. Obviously, it doesn't sound anything like a pad. It's pretty abrupt. So what I always want to do is start out determining my waveforms. For this, I'm going to actually just leave the octave right where it is. Now, I'm wanting something that has a thick, beautiful sound, but also has a little bit of a buzziness to it. So I don't want to use the triangle. I think that's going to be a little too bright. So what I'm going to try doing is pulling the sawtooth quite a bit higher and then blend the rectangle to about an equal level. And that should already be a lot better. Let's listen. And then I'm going to actually try bringing in these low frequency oscillator. So this is my -1 octave and this is my -2, and I really want them to thicken this out for me. And I might even try bringing in a little noise. So let's see how this is going. Better. It definitely sounds fuller, but the sense of time is obviously way off. So before we do anything else, let's work on the envelope. And I want to have, a very long attack, because what I'm going for is that I want to hear the low frequencies come in and low waveforms come in, and then hear them exit, and then hear that going back and forth. So I'm going to actually leave the decay and sustain about the same and have the release be just a tiny bit higher than that, but I might even move the attack to be the longest thing. So this should already make a huge difference. So we can already begin to hear the arc of the sound changing, which is really nice. Now, to kind of go back to this, I'm not going to use as much vibrato, although you could. I just happen to like the wah sound, so I'm going to go a little more on that, but not too high. I don't want like a pulsing wah effect. By high, I mean also just like how fast. I don't want this to be like necessarily like club music per se. Not that something is wrong with that. It's just not the sound that I'm going for, so I don't want it reverberating at an even tempo. So let's see if this sounds nice. Yeah, so that's quite a bit better. So we can pull that down so you could kind of hear it shaking back and forth. I don't know if that's quite the frequency that I want to have cut off. So I might go a little higher so we can hear just a little more sizzle and do a little more resonance to accent that. And let's see if this sounds a little better. Again, these are all just C chords. Let's see what happens if I try playing an octave below. It's definitely better. I think I might try changing this down. Might thicken it up a little bit with the chorus. Maybe do just a little bit of the overdrive and maybe see if changing this velocity volume kind of give me a little more of something that I like. Yeah, I think that sounds really pretty actually. So we'll listen one more time and a little lower. I think I like it a little bit better if you go a little higher. So let's see. Yeah. So there we kind of have now a nice contrast between the waveforms that are coming in and the ones that are leaving, which kind of gives us a nice sense of time. I hope this has been helpful, and thanks for watching.